right. So we're going to talk about why and how. I think the why relatively obvious, but I think recent events might need us to redouble our efforts. Clearly it's essential, it's achievable. The happiness factor. This is not just about a technical issue. We're trying to make people happy, resilient systems everywhere. It's inevitable, and we want to create livable buildings for everybody at all levels in society. I'm going to start off with a slightly different tact. Last Thursday I was in Vancouver on a panel actually talking about carbon and the importance of it, and we were interrupted in the middle of that conversation listening to the announcement by President Trump that he pulled out of the Paris Treaty. I'm originally from Leeds in the north of England, and I just became an American citizen last year, attempting to vote to support not Mr. Trump. So this is the letter that I got from President Obama a year ago, which introduced me to being a U.S. citizen. And it's kind of interesting that the idea that you could make a difference. And for me, net zero buildings, zero carbon cities is about knowing that we can make a difference. Unfortunately, some of the people would like to stop this and would prefer us to go back 150 years with the agenda. The carbon countdown, as you know, is imperative. It's been interesting to see the response actually since last Thursday to the announcement that the US was exiting that treaty. When we think about the net zero agenda, what we need to recognize is there needs to be an independent certification for it to be believable. So in this case, we do have the International Living Future Institute, people that are in charge of Living Building Challenge, in fact, coming out a number of years ago with the first independently verified net zero standard globally. We've seen others since adopt a similar posture, and it's essential that we do have this independent criteria to advise citizens, businesses, and governments what's in fact net zero. The principles have been established for at least 4 decades about how we do this. We start off with reducing demand within our buildings, and we double the efficiency, and whatever's left we deal with renewables. So the actual methodology is relatively straightforward. I'd argue that it can be applied to many different building types, various scales, and we can see things that have happened in the last 10 years that are making it increasingly easy and in fact affordable to do that. I mean, look no further than your desktop. You know, when we started looking at the Apple, the iMac, we were seeing interesting machine that used about 35 watts of energy back then, and today with significantly more power, the same piece of equipment is less than 1 watt. So in other words, the plug loads themselves, the things that fuel a lot of the needs for larger systems, or so we're told by certain technocrats, are no longer actually required. We know that technology continues to advance and bring forward new solutions and opportunities, make our buildings smarter. We're seeing an example here of the first sample in our office here in London of liquid crystal switch or dynamic glass. So think of your TV screen, think of that 60-inch screen, not that many years ago costing £5,000, now costing £500. So driving down, similarly, some of our building fabrics, perhaps through liquid crystal technology, looks like an opportunity for all of us coming up sometime soon. We see construction methods changing to understand and appreciate and modify the carbon intensity, both in the embodied and therefore from there on the continued carbon intensity of the building itself. We see that lighting has shifted dramatically in the 10-year period, not only more efficient, but actually better quality of lighting. So we see technology helping us in every aspect, also air movement. We know that we can tolerate much higher temperatures if we move more air. Higher temperatures, higher humidity. We were seeing a presentation this morning about this very topic, actually. And we know that some of the products we've seen here today at our event, promoting and using much more radiant systems, which allows us to be more comfortable and less energy costs. I'm really intrigued by where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, how the venture capital people have kind of connected with the technology companies to create new products. Here's one which is really a polling of what people think in a space about are they too hot, too cold. So it's sort of a democratic way of adjusting the thermostat so that we're not pushing up and down any more than we need to, inherently saving energy. I've seen in the time that I've lived in California, I've seen the price of solar panels go down rapidly, dramatically. I mean, today we get installed solar equipment for about $1.85 per watt. It's significant. It's 5 times less expensive than 4 years earlier. So we've seen downward pressure, not just on the equipment, but on the labor forces that install it. We've seen a massive uptake in terms of the largest companies in the world choosing to buy their own renewable energy through bulk purchasing agreements. So they're actually advancing the manufacturing and installation in cities and countries around the world to create more renewable on-grid energy. We, here in the UK, we saw a few weeks ago actually, the first day that in the UK we didn't use coal to generate electricity on the national grid. You know, I grew up in a coal mining area, and of course those jobs don't exist anymore. We've transitioned to a fossil-free economy, transitioned to a fossil-free economy. I drive a Tesla. You know, it's interesting what's going on in the electric vehicle world. I mean, you know, the idea that mobility now can be somewhat emission-free, maybe not fossil-free, but as we see simultaneously advancement by Tesla and others into stationary storage. So now we can really start to bank that daytime solar power or wind power or wave energy, store it, re-release it, you know, opening up the opportunity for so-called smart grids, microgrids, etc. So they're kind of part of the bigger patterns I think we're seeing, which you know, helping driving this notion of making net zero reality, not just a prospect. I'll just go through relatively quickly a number of recently built projects in the last 5 or 6 years that we're quite pleased with. Packard Foundation is a project that took me to California 15 years earlier. It's the philanthropy arm of the Hewlett Packard organization, David and Lucille Packard Foundation. And it achieved net zero energy in its first year of operation. And by net zero energy, what we mean is on an annual basis, we use and export the same amount or even hopefully more. This building's turned out to be actually net positive. So typically what we see is buildings that we designed to net zero ultimately end up being closer to net positive because we're still overestimating the loads more than we need to. It's part of sort of the engineering profession in particular, sort of lower it into risk as it's designing systems for enlightened clients in this first wave. Packard Foundation is obviously an organization with a sizable budget for its projects, but here's a very scrappy, low-cost refurbishment of an existing tilt warehouse, also in the Bay Area. Very cost-effective adaptation to net zero, now used by the tech sector for its employees. The developer, Kevin Baines, is an interesting character. We've done 7 projects with the same developer now, getting bigger every time. And he's telling the world that these buildings are actually less expensive. Actually, it's a financially positive proposition to design, build, and operate these simple, elegant, cost-effective net zero commercial buildings. Adapting those buildings that we want to throw away, which is an interesting perspective. Craig Venter, responsible for, largely responsible for the human genome sequencing breakthroughs, his lab in San Diego. So, we see all the myths, we can't do it on, we can't do it in existing buildings, not true. Can't do it in lab buildings, big loads. I mean, these are much more intense than office buildings. But the principles apply and remain the same. We take the typical condition. We had some passive strategies to kind of lower the load, but the big breakthroughs really, when we start to attack things like the plug loads themselves, we go measure what the equipment is that Craig's using in his sequencing labs, and we actually find the real ampage that's going through there, not what's on the nameplate. And we design systems to that, and again, significantly downsize, which allows us to kind of build the PV on the roof, and through some elegant architecture, I think, make a bigger roof with an internal atrium naturally ventilated to kind of solve the problem that we're faced with here. Back in London, next to Bedside, we're working on Hackbridge Primary School. And this again is targeting a one planet journey, which will include obviously net zero energy, wastewater, as well as other attributes that one planet is known for. Back in San Francisco, this building received by CIBSE the International Building of the Year Award this year. Again, it's an adaptive reuse. The client and owner is a contractor. Contractors are pretty pragmatic people, as we all know. They chose to attack their building here, a 100-year-old existing warehouse building with a similar net zero approach, bringing a quite tired building back to life in an interesting way with beautiful spaces, beautiful daylight, very small systems, lots of biophilic design through the vertical green walls and such like, and just a beautiful space to live and work and net zero. We like to think that these buildings can be happy spaces for people as well, and here we're showing some benchmarking about how this building stacks up on various scales of air quality, lighting, acoustics and so on against the benchmark buildings, the whole data set, and it consistently is doing much better. So evidence that these buildings may be leading us to places that are happy for people. But net zero and happy people also need to be living in beautiful spaces. So when we talk about living buildings, here's a building in Vancouver that's been operating now for a few years that we worked on, and it's aiming at those net zero waste, energy and water goals that the other buildings are, but it's doing it in a profoundly beautiful way, I'd suggest. So the idea that driving to zero doesn't mean it needs to be ugly or sort of uniform by any means. Building agenda is interesting, it's difficult, it's complicated, but it's I think the bigger opportunities are when we start to think outside the building and outside the box. I think we build these interconnections through green infrastructure opportunities, lots of spaces between buildings which become interesting for habitat, and of course there's a lot of interconnectedness which creates complexity. Anybody who's trying to fly last week out of Heathrow would have a problem because the system crashed. And one of the things about interconnected systems, they do become more complex. In an ideal world, we could all live in our individual building and not suffer this, but we live in a real world where we have codependencies, and it creates, and it does a great feeling. I was actually in the black space some number of years ago. I was advising the Prime Minister of Canada at the time. I was in Ottawa when the grid shut down. 100 million people lost power for the best part of a week. So almost like 2 UKs losing power for an entire week. It sort of shows you how fragile the system can be, and kind of led in many ways to the beginning of a significant interest in the resilience agenda. We saw, before that, we saw Chicago in a massive heat wave when 1,000 people died, when the temperatures got too hot, and then the kids started knocking the fire hydrants off so they could keep cool. Why not? They should keep cool, but they forgot that the old people were in the 60-story towers just on Lake Michigan, and they were losing the water for their air conditioning and drinking needs. I mean, back here, of course, we had the heat wave 2003 as well, when we had significant deaths. So we're seeing, so the zero energy agenda links to zero carbon, links to climate change responsiveness, which is what the climate change changes are actually causing these extreme weather events. They're all connected. We just finished and published the latest energy code for the city of Toronto. 6 million people live in that jurisdiction, and we're really quite pleased with coming up. We think this is the world's first code that has a resilient index where developers can be incentivized to go for higher levels beyond the basic code. Let's go for a stretch code, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and maybe get to a passive house standard and get some zoning density benefits perhaps. Because we know that if we get these more passive buildings which are tending to zero inherently, we can lose power in the summer or the winter, and people can occupy the building still. This is a significant agenda when we're looking at the glass towers around the world that rely on artificial systems to support their occupancy needs. Part of this work included doing some real costs not just theory. What's interesting is the most effective, the most resilient of the building types that are typologies that are referenced in the standard, which are less expensive, not more expensive, through independent cost data validated by the local construction community. As I mentioned, as we move to district scale thinking, we need to think differently. We can clearly harness opportunities between buildings. I like to think of certain buildings as being hot buildings and certain buildings as being cold buildings. We can just kind of share the energy between the two. It's net zero implicitly. There's a project in Luxembourg we're working on that's kind of getting at these interrelated optimization opportunities. I'm an advisor to C40. This is the large city agenda. It was actually kicked off by Ken Livingstone and Nicky Gavron here in London. But it was a C20 originally. But the biggest cities in the world are kind of talking to each other. They don't have time to talk to the national governments. It's too slow. So the big cities talk to each other. They have similar problems, similar issues. And I think we're seeing rapid response by the big cities and certainly taking the real leadership. Within a short period of time after Trump's announcement he was exiting the Paris Accord, 187 cities in the US to it and said, we're not backing out. I think as of right now it's 223, I think, Ed. That's what we heard last notice. So this is interesting. This is an interesting issue where the people who elect these mayors of cities are saying, we want these things. We don't care what the federal agency's doing. We're going to just take care of our own people, our own communities.
Americans don't need Washington to meet our Paris commitment, and Americans are not going to let Washington stand in the way of fulfilling it. That's the message that mayors, governors, and business leaders across the United States have been sending. So today, I want the world to know the U.S. will meet our Paris commitment.
As that's Mayor Bloomberg, and evidence of his commitment is the building that's just about to open near the Bank of England. Building I think is designed for 200-year life, or close to it. But we got this guy to deal with, he's going to have to go green whether he likes it or not. Because we just actually wrote the energy code for Washington, D.C. That's not covered by the feds, that's covered by the district itself. And guess what the energy code wants? It wants to decarbonize. It's decarbonizing the grid. It's pushing energy efficiency. It's moving towards net zero. Last week in Vancouver, published the Canadian zero carbon strategy for that country. It's a cold country, it's a vast country, but again, committed to similar agendas, getting to zero energy, zero carbon. And also last week in Vancouver, the World Green Building Council issued its roadmap for carbon zero buildings in 8 different countries around the world. Imagery of Australia, which is one of the contributors to that work. So there's this work going on everywhere, is the message. It's going on private businesses like the big firms buying renewables. It's going on by the cities, going on by great countries that still stick with it. And these buildings, these net zero buildings and this agenda, it can be achieved, it's happening, and it's for everyone. And if you're a basketball fan or even remotely watching the series right now, you know that the Golden State Warriors have one tagline, and it's strength in numbers. And from my point of view, this is all possible if we all pull together. So, thank you.